Hello there. All right, it's Friday, another beautiful day, so I hope you're out enjoying the weather. Once again, it's so nice and warm that I'm sitting on the porch instead of out in the sunshine to do Read Aloud. We are reading the Sisters Grimm, Book 2, The Unusual Suspects, and we really appreciate both the publisher and the author being flexible and allowing educators to read still with our students, even with these unusual circumstances in this adventure we're on. So a big thank you to Michael Buckley and his publisher and allowing us to continue our reading adventure during this time. So when we last left Sabrina and Daphne, they were with Granny Relda, Mr. Canis, and Elvis, and they had a frog monster that was trying to get them. So they were driving, and Mr. Canis just let Granny Relda drive. Going somewhere, she laughed. That's the monster, the frog monster. Elvis whined and crawled under his blanket as Granny floored the accelerator and the car lunged forward. The monster tumbled over the hood, up the windshield, over the roof, onto the trunk, and fell off the back of the car. "She's gone!" Sabrina cried, just before the freak hopped back onto the trunk. It laughed at them through the rear window. "She's back!" Daphne cried, diving under the blanket with Elvis. Granny made a sharp left onto an old dirt road and pressed hard on the gas pedal. The ancient car screamed in protest, but held up its end with a burst of speed so powerful Sabrina felt the G-force pushing her body into the seat springs. Despite the incredible speed, the frog girl held on with little effort and pounded angrily on the rear window. The massive blows caused a thick crack in the glass. "Turning right!" Granny shouted from the driver's seat just before she made the turn. Elvis tumbled over the girls as the car banked to the right, but the maneuver didn't seem to shake the monster. "Turning left!" Granny shouted, and Elvis tumbled to the other side of the car, landing heavily on Sabrina's belly and knocking the wind out of her. The frog girl smacked the window again, and this time it exploded. Sorry, I just accidentally powered off my Kindle. So 1 second there. It wasn't fully powered off, it was just sleeping. All right, so the frog girl smacked the window again, and this time it exploded, sending chunks of glass into the back seat. Several large portions of the window stayed attached, but the monster pulled them off effortlessly and tossed them into the road. Sabrina pushed Elvis off of her and fought to fill her empty, burning lungs. As she struggled, the frog girl reached into the back seat with her big, sticky hands, unfastened Daphne's rope belt, and snatched the little girl right out of her seat. Still choking and gasping for air, Sabrina grabbed desperately at Daphne's ankle and tried to pull her back inside the car. But the frog girl's grip was too strong. "She's got Daphne," she gasped. But Mr. Canis had already sprung into action. He rolled down his window and pulled his upper body out of the car. "There's no need to hurry, old man." "Shh." The frog girl screamed over the wind. "You'll die soon enough." A ferocious roar echoed back at the monster, and Sabrina could see her eyes grow wide with surprise. "You're one of us," the frog girl cried. "And you fight for the life of a filthy Grimm? You're the traitor. I should have known you by your stink." "Put the child back into the car," Sabrina heard Mr. Canis demand, even over the roaring engine. "The traitor gets no favors," the frog girl laughed. She reached into the back seat with her free arm and grasped Sabrina. Sabrina squirmed and slapped at the disgusting hand, but it still managed to snatch her sweater and drag her out of the window as well. "I'm not going to tell you again, beast," Mr. Canis threatened. "I've heard stories about you, traitor," the monster croaked. "The big bad wolf, trying to make amends for all the bad things he has done. You'll fail, old-timer. Your heart isn't in it. But no matter. I'll give you the dignity of knowing you died trying." Mr. Canis was too far away to do anything. Sabrina knew if she and her sisters were going to stay alive, they were going to have to save themselves. "Daphne, do you remember Mr. Oberlin?" Sabrina shouted, hoping her sister had not forgotten this particular foster father. "From the Bronx?" the little girl asked. Sabrina nodded. The disgusting look flashed across her sister's face told Sabrina that her plan wasn't the little girl's favorite. Regardless, Daphne nodded, and together the sisters leaned down and bit the frog girl hard. The monster shrieked in agony and let go of Daphne. Sabrina grabbed her sister. Together they scrambled back into the car. The frog girl huddled on the trunk, clutching her wounds. What happened? Granny Relda said, still pushing hard on the gas. It appears I'm not the only one in our home with fangs, Mr. Canis said, climbing back into the car. You've got to get rid of this thing, Sabrina shouted as she wiped the horrible taste out of her mouth with her shirt sleeve. A bit of the goo was on her chin and her shirt stuck to it like it was powerful glue. Daphne was also busy rubbing the monster's taste off of her tongue onto her sleeve. Again, the frog girl reached in through the window, but Elva snapped at her hand and the monster pulled it back again. Don't worry, Lieblings, Granny said as she made a rough turn onto a gravel road. I have a plan. Sabrina looked through the windshield and saw a sign blocking the road ahead. It read, Danger. Bridge unsafe. Go no farther. Worse was what was beyond that. In the distance was an old, run-down country bridge covering a rocky stream. One look at it told Sabrina that a mouse wouldn't be able to cross the bridge safely, let alone Granny Relda's ancient 2-ton monstrosity on wheels. What's Granny's plan? Daphne said, smacking at the frog monster's hand as it snatched at her through the window. You don't want to know, Sabrina replied. The car crashed through the old wooden sign and it exploded around them. A giant chunk slid over the roof and by the sound of the pain groan smacked the monster in her head. The collision was enough to knock the frog girl off the car and she tumbled painfully to the ground. Unfortunately, Granny didn't stop driving, and when the jalopy raced onto the beginning of the rickety bridge, Sabrina knew they were in trouble. Creaking beams and snapping wood drowned out the car's backfires and grinding gears. The old bridge tilted to the left just as the car reached the halfway point, and she saw a sight that nearly gave her a heart attack. The middle of the bridge had collapsed, leaving a giant hole no car could ever get across, and Granny wasn't slowing down. Granny, we're not going to make it, Sabrina shouted, battling the roaring engine to be heard. I love pancakes too, the old woman shouted back. I hate this car, Sabrina thought to herself. Granny Relda floored the accelerator. The engine screamed. A flame shot out of the car's muffler, and suddenly they were soaring over the gaping hole. They landed hard on the other side and raced onto the road just as the bridge buckled and collapsed into the rocky stream below. After several yards, Granny brought the car to a stop. She shut off the engine. That took care of that ugly little beast, Granny laughed as she turned around to face the girls. How exciting was that? Were you excited? I'm having the time of my life. Everyone remained speechless, except for Elvis, who whined softly. Granny Relda didn't notice. She continued to jabber on like a little kid who had had too much sugar before bedtime. Oh boy, did Froggy get the surprise of her life, she continued, smacking the steering wheel proudly. You put Granny Relda behind the wheel and things get done. The old woman turned back around and prepared to start the car again, but everyone shouted, No! In unison. Mr. Canis snatched the keys out of the ignition. Sabrina saw the disappointment in her grandmother's face. The old woman slowly got out of the car, and Mr. Canis slid over to the driver's seat. As she got into the passenger side, Granny Relda crossed her arms and pouted. It reminded Sabrina of something Daphne would do. My driving isn't that bad, is it? The old woman asked. Yes, everyone shouted. Once the house was unlocked, the family staggered inside, with Sabrina quietly cursing one of the worst days of her life. Keep in mind, this was their first day of elementary school at Ferryport Landing Elementary. That's a busy day. Puck was sprawled across the couch. He had moved the books away from the television and was watching it with the sound all the way up. The boy was surrounded by 3 delivery pizza boxes, empty bags of chips, a leaky carton of ice cream, and a 2-liter bottle of soda from which he was currently drinking. On his belly was a can of spray cheese, and when he saw the family limp into the house, he put down the soda and lifted the cheese can, spraying an enormous portion into his mouth. Then he gargled with it. Once he had swallowed the greasy orange junk food, he let out an enormous belch that actually rattled the windows. Old lady, he crowed, you've been hiding this magic box from me. You could see other worlds on it. I just watched a man in his talking sports car jump across a river. Do you know what he's talking about when he talks about the magic box? You might have been using it some yourself lately. Sabrina felt her exhaustion turn instantly to anger. From their expressions, she could see the rest of the family felt the same way. While they had been hunted by a frog monster, Puck had had the best day of his life. Fate was cruel. "What?" he said defensively, noticing their glares. Granny started dinner and patiently explained to Puck what had happened to them. The boy seemed to think Mr. Grumpner's murder was fascinating and was terribly depressed that he hadn't seen the frog girl. "Was she ugly?" he asked. "Why is it that I miss all the fun?" "I guess you just don't have our luck," Sabrina grumbled. "I hope the two of you washed," he said to the girls. "Frogs give you warts, and it sounds like the one you fought off was mighty big. I wouldn't be surprised if you wake up in the morning and find you are one giant brown wart." Daphne's eyes grew as big as saucers. "Nuh-uh," she said. "It's not true." "Sorry, kiddo, but if you hurry and take a bath, it might not be too late," Puck advised. The girl rushed up out of the kitchen and could be heard running through the house and up to the bathroom. "You shouldn't tease her like that," Sabrina said, vigorously washing her hands at the kitchen sink. "Puck, do you know the widow?" Granny Relda asked as she got up to stir the pot of soup on the stove. "Of course," Puck replied, "Queen of the Crows." "Go get her," Granny Relda said. "Why?" he asked. "Are we going to cook her?" "Of course not," Granny said, horrified. "I have some questions for her." "Since when does the trickster king act as your messenger, old lady?" the boy asked. "Since he started living under her roof," Mr. Canis growled. He slammed his fist down hard on the kitchen counter, causing the sugar bowl to lose its lid. "This is serious business, boy. Now go." Puck eyed Canis stubbornly. "Villains do not run errands." The old man's eyes turned ice blue, and a bit of his wolf voice came out. "I'll show you a villain, trickster." Glistening wings sprang from Puck's back and flapped loudly. He flew quickly through the house and slammed the front door as he left. Do you think he was happy about going? Maybe not. Or maybe he just didn't like Mr. Canis's attitude. Mr. Canis leaned against the kitchen doorway and tried to catch his breath. This was the first day he had been out of his room in 3 weeks, and it hadn't been an easy one. If the old man was struggling with keeping his emotions in check, the last 4 hours had to have been an incredible test. "Mr. Canis," Granny said, rubbing the old man's back with her palm, "go and rest." "There may be more danger," Canis insisted. "Old friend, I already have 3 children arguing all the time," Granny Relda scolded. "I do not need another." The old man nodded and shuffled out of the kitchen. "Who's the widow?" Sabrina asked. "Hans Christian Andersen wrote about her in the Snow Queen. She's an old friend," Granny said. "She might be able to shed some light on the crow feathers we found. She's sort of an expert on birds." "So you don't think the frog girl killed Mr. Grumpner?" Sabrina said. "No, Lieblings. Frogs don't make webs," the old woman said. "Neither do birds." "True, but the birds may have seen something." And we're going to stop there for now. Remember, we don't do Read Aloud on Saturday and Sunday, so keep in mind that I won't see you for a few days, but I will be back on Monday. And Monday we are also starting where we will have daily hangouts from 10 to 11. And these are going to be, if you want to share something with me, if you have questions on what you're working on next week, if your parents have questions, they're welcome to join in the Google Hangout, their meeting. So keep an eye out for the email with the link to this Read Aloud and the link to our Google Hangouts for next week. You guys take care, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.